Go out of order. We're going to do the Public Works Committee first. The minute taker, take roll, please.
Alderman Shockey. Alderman Winger.
Here.
Alderman Eugene Wesley.
Here.
Alderman Cadella.
Here.
Alderman Police.
Here.
Alderman Coles. Alderman Roy Wesley.
Here.
Alderman Lewitton.
I need a quorum. I need a motion to approve the minutes, July 8th, 2010.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any corrections, changes? No, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Board of recommendation, approve a vehicle replacement 467 current motors state purchase of $22,276 with up to a filling for equipment sales and for $21,684 for the total amount not to exceed $43,960. I believe this is a budget item. We put in the budget. Does anyone care to comment, or could we have a motion on the floor to, I'll make the motion to approve.
Second.
Any questions, concerns? All in favor? Aye. Motion carries. Board and recommendation to approve another vehicle, 468, purchase of a used 680 AWS loader for McCain International in an amount not to exceed $30,900. That is a motion.
How much was that?
Not to exceed $30,900. It is a used piece of equipment. It's from a, they sell all their used stuff after so many years. Am I right, John?
Sure, I can take you through this.
Go ahead.
In this year's budget, we included funds to purchase a new small front-end style skid steer loader. After looking at some issues at the North Wastewater Treatment Plant facility, we wanted to get a larger piece of equipment to move processed sludge around and also to do double duty with filling trucks with spoil and main brakes and items like that. So we looked at getting a possible used unit. Unfortunately, the funds available did not allow us to purchase a new unit. We did research some used units in the local market, did come up with this Geel 680, which is an all-wheel steering front-end style loader. It's a 2005 year with very low hours, 1,200 hours on it. It was owned privately, and it was brought to McCann Case, who we've bought several backhoes from, end loaders, and we demoed the unit. We have it at our Public Works facility now. Staff does like it. We did have our mechanics look it over. They do approve. It is under the budget amount of $40,000, and it does come with a 1-year warranty. So including that, it's going to increase our abilities at both of those divisions and increase the capabilities, and being under budget. We did research other used units throughout the Midwest and did find them in similar price points, actually a little higher without the transportation or the warranty. So we were comfortable in bringing it to you as purchasing as a used unit.
And John, our mechanic has already gone all over this piece of equipment and sees no major problems with this. Am I correct?
Our mechanic has looked at it. McCann's mechanics have gone through the unit, and they have a warranty with it for 1 year, as I said. But our mechanic has looked at it. He didn't really tear into it. No real need to do that. The unit is functioning. It looks like a top-notch item. He did check the normal wear points, and those are covered in the warranty as well. But we do feel confident in the capabilities of the machine.
Okay. I would entertain that motion. Is there a second on that motion?
Second.
Questions, concerns? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? No opposed. Item number 6, report of recommendation, approve a contract to RJN Group in amount not to exceed $71,910 of a citywide sanitation sewer flow monitoring. Just so you guys know, this is a budget item in the CIP project. I know we're a little confused with Baxton and Woods doing part of it. I'll have John or someone explain where Baxter Woods is doing compared to this project.
Absolutely, I'll take you through it. When we originally did in last year's budget that small I&I study, which is more the smoke testing and the resident inspections end of things in the Forest View area, that is almost completed at this point, and we should have a formal report here in the next month. We just finished smoke testing. This is for the full citywide I&I study that was included in the CIP project. That's going to be ultimately listed as a 5-year project. This is the first year of the project, and we selected RJN to do the flow monitoring for that. And I'm going to turn this over to Ed Kaline on my right and Mike Young on my far right in 1 second. But this was designed to begin looking at the I&I project. We're using the flow monitoring to monitor the amount of sanitary flow coming to both of our treatment plants through the entire city. So it's a city-wide flow monitoring program, which is the beginning fledgling steps of the I&I study, while we were just doing a pointed study on the Forest View area. So that was the difference between the two projects.
Okay.
And Mike?
You want to give us a brief presentation of this? Alderman Roy Wesley.
This is the first time I've ever seen a map like this. Are you going to go through this whole map?
Oh, no, I'm just going to touch upon it just kind of briefly and some of the major things that are on there. I just wanted you to be aware of it so you can just look at it quickly, and it's the same as this map here. So,
This is a whole area that they're going to do for the,
I understand that, but this is the first time I'm seeing this map, and you're going to ask me to vote on something here soon. And I would appreciate if I would have had this map a little earlier, because if I did have questions, I could have asked John the questions. So I understand this map.
okay,
So,
John?
Mr. Kramer, next time could you make sure anything new like this?
I do apologize. That is my fault. They did include that in the packet originally, and it is my fault that it's not in there. So please don't hold that against RJN.
Okay.
That was my omission that I failed to put that in there.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Nuzio, please.
John, this I&I, is this the smoke testing on this, or is this something different? Because I see I&I, and I assume it's smoke testing.
I&I study is inflow infiltration. So this is the beginning stages of a full citywide I&I
Are we
study.
smoke testing the whole city?
Not with this proposal that you have in front of you. What you have in front of you is solely flow monitoring for the sanitary system. So basically it involves installing meters in and around points around the city and deciding where we start the full I&I study, prioritize it from these flow monitoring results. This is the first step in the I&I process.
Okay,
Can I
let me
continue?
clear one up. Alderman Roy Wesley, it is included in your packet. It's a back page of the contract for RN. Item number 6, it's the last page, the backing.
I see it. Sorry.
Nuzio, please, go ahead.
On the I&I, I thought we were smoke testing one ward every year for 4 years at 50,000 or something, or 40,000. Maybe I'm confused. That's
The way I placed it in the CIP, I had put roughly 100,000 in each year for 5 years. In order to begin that, I felt the city needed to come up with a prioritization of the entire city. What's the worst first approach? And in doing that, the flow monitoring was the first step in beginning that. We need to know where our worst areas are with I&I and then start to draw conclusions from that. So this would be the first step in doing that, for us to go out and just begin in one area without knowing the other conditions coming into it.
so we should do this before we do the smoke testing.
Correct. This would be the first initial step. Correct.
So why did we smoke test that one small section if we didn't do this beforehand?
Well, smoke testing wasn't the only item we did in the Forest View area. We did some flow monitoring in the Forest View area. We did some resident inspections, illegal connections, and smoke testing is just a portion of the I&I study itself.
Okay.
The Forest View area was mainly looked at because of the pressure we were getting from the residents in that area, looking at that area as a pointed area. Was there something staggeringly wrong in that area that we missed? As a staff, we needed to have that area investigated because we were having all those issues down there. That's why we selected that very small study area.
So that area is omitted from the rest of this project here?
Well, unfortunately, the flow monitoring is still going to need to monitor that area because primarily that area feeds the North Wastewater Treatment Plant. So there's still going to be some overlap with that.
Okay.
I could give a little background to kind of answer some of the questions and so forth too. There's kind of a couple of purposes of doing this. One of them is just to get a good idea of exactly how much flow is in the system. So that was part of the purpose of this, so that when you do the smoke testing and other improvements to it, you know where the system kind of stands now, and then as things are found and corrected, you can get an idea of how much flow you're taking out and what kind of improvements do you expect to get with those changes. So as part of the treatment plant expansion projects and so forth, you can get a little better idea.
And when you say that, what, these monitors go in and they stay in permanent?
They are in there for 90 days. So it's kind of over a period of time where you can get multiple rain events and kind of get a feel for small rain events and a little bit larger rain events and how the system responds to that and how much additional flow that you see during that time. And then also what the flow is during a dry period. If you have a week or so without rain, you know, what's kind of the base flow within the system that really the flow that should be in there. The other purpose of doing it is to prioritize, as John had mentioned, of which areas should be focused on and which areas. And you may find some areas where the flows are pretty good. You may not even need to spend effort at all on it and put more effort into some of the areas that need more improvement. The area that was studied with the work done before is all focused right along the creek in this area here. Generally, that's an area you're going to do a lot of work anyway. So to do that before you do the flow monitoring is not really out of place. A lot of times you want to see the part that's away from the creek, the rest of the city and what's going on there. What we did here is split it into, there's two main basins because you have two treatment plants. So we've got the southern plant, so you have the two southern basins, and then the north plant off Irving Park. And that we've got 6 basins that we separated that into based upon how the sewers come together. And so that's what we're monitoring. We've got, for the 2 southern basins, we've got a flow meter here for basin what we call S1, another flow meter over here for what we call basin S2. For basin N1, we've actually got 2 meters because there's parallel lines on Irving Park, so we want to monitor both of those lines. So there's 2 meters for that basin. For N2, which part of N2 is part of that study area for the other work, but we've got 1 meter that takes all of this area, so it's really monitoring the whole thing, and what the other part that was studied is just part of that. We've got another meter here that takes what we call basin N3. Now for basin N4, there's a lift station right here off Irving Park that covers all of basin N4 is tributary to this lift station. And based upon lift station data in terms of runtime and so forth, we can use that to kind of get a good feel from the flow from that. So instead of putting a meter in that location, we're going to use the lift station data. So that saves a little bit of money to just use the lift station for that. We're doing the same thing on what we call basin N6. There's a lift station right here that pumps over into N5. And so this whole area is all tributary to that. So again, we're going to utilize data from those lift stations in lieu of putting in flow meters. And then we have another flow meter right here that takes space in what we call N5. So it's kind of equal splits to get an idea of where the flow is in each part of the city and the city system.
Is that your presentation? Is there anything
So
else?
I think that's kind of a summary of it. I can get into more details if you need me to, but I kind of just want to give an overview of it.
I have, Mr. Cadala, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A question that I don't know if it can be answered. I mean, 90 days worth of flow testing. No guarantee we're going to have a major rain event in that period of time. Our biggest problems, our only problems are happening during major rain events. Obviously that's how this project is priced, but have you ever been involved in a study where you've left them in place until you had a major rain event, and if it took 12 months, it took 12 months?
There are some projects that we've done that are 365 days. Lots of times there's some kind of administrative order or consent decree or other things from either the state or federal government that leads towards that. Most studies of this size are 60 to 120 days is typically the longest that we'll see it. Most of ours we do around 75 to 90 days. If you get an event, what we call a 2-month event, 3-month event, which is basically like an inch and a half or 2 inches of rain, you can get a good feel for what's going on with that and get an idea of, you look at, okay, what happens in a half an inch, 1 inch, 2 inches of rain, and then you can get an idea of where it would go if you got 4 or 5 inches of rain. You can kind of correlate it and take a lot of the data from that. So that's pretty standard procedure. And to get a good idea of what's going on and how to prioritize it, you generally get enough information. I mean, could you get an extremely dry 90 days? You can, but generally over 90 days, we've had a pretty dry last 3 weeks, but usually over 3 months, you're going to get a couple, decent rain events that you get enough data from to give you a good feel what's going on.
So you've got enough experience, and history says that you've got a pretty darn good chance of extrapolating what would happen in a 7-inch rainfall if we only see a 1-inch rainfall at any single point in time during this 90
Right.
days.
And I think the important thing is when you size in a system, you're generally looking to try to make sure your 3, 4, 5-inch rain events that the system deals with that. When you get those 7, 8, 9-inch events, you have so much street flooding and so forth that there's so many other things going on that to really plan for that is much more difficult. It's those pretty heavy rain events, but the ones in the 3, 4, 5 that you want to try to avoid problems. When you get those rain events like we had 2 years ago in September, that you're going to have issues, and can't spend enough money to really solve that problem. So you're really looking to work in that 2 to 5-inch rain event and try to focus on trying to minimize the problems that occur then.
Okay, you have another one? I let them that Mr. Lewitton has arrived. Mayor Johnson?
Mr. Kramer mentioned this is the first step, so I'd like to, if you could summarize for me, what's the big picture here? What are all the steps in the process? What is the end result? Is it a 20-year master plan to replace the sewers? Is it plugging leaks? From beginning to end, what's the whole process? And I know you can't give me specific figures, but what are we looking at to complete all the testing through the whole process? What is the possible repairs we're looking at?
Right. What this does is gives you an overview of what the total system is doing, and then we'll prepare a report at the end that will have recommendations once we have the data. Obviously, know a lot more when we're done than in the beginning. Of recommending which areas to focus on first, and it'll really, we'll prioritize the basins and see what we get. If the flow happens to be twice as much over here as it is up in here, you put the efforts in that area, and that's the area you want to focus on. If you find with this flow data, that some of the sewers, the capacity of that you are way over the capacity of that in a big rain event, you can get some of this I&I out of the system, but you still may not have enough capacity where you might need some relief sewers or other things in there. Another situation, you may look at it and say, you know what, the flow's not much more above the capacity of the sewers. We get a little bit of improvement in this, and there's no need to do any other infrastructure improvements. Maybe some lining because you have some structural problems, but as far as actually getting more capacity, the system's fine in this area. And so that's what this initial information can tell you a lot of information on that plan, what it is. As John mentioned, his plan is kind of a 5-year program where he's got a certain amount of money for I&I reduction. And from this information, you say, we'll pick okay, which one of these areas is the worst area or the worst two areas, and let's focus on those first and put the efforts there, and then step through the process. And as I said, you may find some areas that the problem's really not there, and there's really no point why spend precious resources on an area where there's not really a problem, and this will tell you that too.
If I can follow up, if I understood correctly, the 100,000 per year, that's for doing the studies. What I'm getting at is what is the big picture? What happens next? Slip lining or repairing holes, or and how much on the capital side are we looking at to correct the problems?
We don't know until we see what it is.
Yeah, I mean, you're probably looking at, if you do 100,000 a year, you do a lining program. It's some of the work can be done by staff. Sometimes it's just replacing covers or things like that. Your lining program, typically you're going to see for each 100,000 you spend in some of the studies, you'll see $400,000 to $500,000 that might be in various improvements of that basin. I mean, that's a really rough number I'm pulling out. But yeah, generally what you would do with that is you would, typically what you want to do, focus on the most is the inflow part of I&I, which is that direct flow in. That's really the thing that causes the peaks and the basement backups. So those are things that are happening on the surface. So items like manhole covers, if you've got pick holes in there that are open, or you got a frame that's offset, or some seals on there that aren't tight, those are things you focus on. As far as the sewers themselves and lining, structural impacts, you certainly want to improve that. But you don't want to line everything. If you would line the entire city, that wouldn't really be money well spent, because that's, you're going to see $30 a foot of sewer that you're going to be doing on that. And this study is, probably works out to be 30 cents a foot. So you want to focus on that so that you can prioritize those. And that's really what the next step is, finding the exact source of the problem. This is quantifying the problem, focusing on that. The next step, the 100,000, is to identify exactly where that is. And then those repairs are generally lining and manhole rehabilitation. And in some areas it does ultimately look at private sector. There is a certain amount of private sector sources. Most communities, you take your first step, focus on your own system first, see how that improves the problem, and then decide if there's some generally low-cost private sector things. There's some downspouts that are directly connected to the system. You want to just get that out into the yard so it's not coming into the sanitary system. There may be a yard drain or a sump pump that's directly in. Some of those things that are relatively easy fixes that eventually you'd want to get into.
Let me try one more time. Let me ask it a different way. Is there?
We prioritize the basins as far as what's the worst basin. Then most likely what we're going to recommend next year is that smoke testing and further, discovery tests, like building inspections, that they ascertain where the real weaknesses are in the system there.
Can you give me an example of a town approximately our size that you did the whole process from start to finish, and then how much was slip lining and how much was infiltration, how much was fixing manholes? Is this 3 years, 5 years? Is this 10 years?
Rolling
I'm just trying to
Meadows.
get a
Rolling
ballpark
Meadows.
of a similar town who commits to do this and what we're looking at from start to finish.
Okay, Rolling Meadows had a very similar problem like this about 14 years ago, and they budgeted about $500,000 a year into their sanitary sewer system, and 8 to 10 years later, they said, this is solved. So I think the population of Rolling Meadows is about 35,000. They had a little bit of a stricter police force, being the MWRD, who was watching them. So you're slightly more independent than they are.
So ballpark, we're looking at maybe 250,000 a year, and it's going to be a
For several
5 to
years.
7 year process.
Yes, to go ahead and to make a real improvement in your sanitary sewer infrastructure, you're looking at that type of commitment. And when you dedicate a fixed number budget like that, then you make significant steps to improve your system.
All right, that's what I was looking for. Thanks.
Mr. Cadella?
The only place that I know of for sure where I've actually seen it happen, where manhole covers are blowing off from the pressure and heavy rain events, is Ward 2, particularly my neighborhood, which is right in line with that north plant. So ultimately, the findings of your study, is it going to, you're going to identify flows, you're going to identify the basins that have the biggest problems. You're going to ultimately, as the process continues and more discovery happens, you're going to identify infiltration, inflow. But will you, at some point, potentially help lead us to the conclusion that perhaps, at least in the area around the treatment plants, there may need to be more overflow storage capacity, and then help determine the price of such a structure versus continuing to find all the I&I problems? Because I honestly don't know where else in town we're having, sewer coming up out of, we're having waste coming up out of the sewer where we don't even have floodwaters yet. So,
I'm gonna answer that in two parts.
okay, I'm just kind of concerned. I think knowing the flows and understanding this first piece of the puzzle is important, but I'm a little concerned with where this goes ultimately when perhaps an overflow storage facility considerably larger than what we have might be the best and most immediate solution.
Right. Okay. I'm gonna answer this in two parts. The first part is with the North Plant, all of these 6 subbasins that I've got here are all tributary to that. So, the problem may be occurring generally over in this area, but it could be from flow from over here. It's all tributary, and since this is your low point by the creek, that addressing some I&I issues over here, and I'm just randomly selecting an area, can significantly improve the conditions over here because that flow's all backing up and the flow's not getting to the plant and through the plant. So just because we're focusing on some other areas doesn't necessarily mean that that's not going to significantly improve things in the area you're talking about. The other part, and part of the reason why it's important to do this flow monitoring, is to know how much flow is in the system. To know that exact question. If you're looking at storage, you need to know how much flow is in the system. This is going to tell you what's there. We know based upon experience how much flow is realistic to get out of the system when these other improvements are made. And if the problem is beyond what's realistic, then you need to look at those issues. Does storage make sense, and where does the financial commitment make the most sense of where the best way to spend money? But for the most part, there are some relatively inexpensive improvements to get flow completely out of the system, which is really what you want to start with. And then eventually some of the more expensive repairs may not be worth it. It may be better to do some storage.
Any other questions? Mr. Lewitton?
I'd like to ask you a question about the infiltration. I understand inflow, and infiltration I understand a little less. What my question is, would it be proper for a city to establish a sump pump monitoring at the time of the sale of property, so that when somebody sells a house, whether it's a foreclosure or a short sale or a regular sale, that the city inspector would go in and see that the sump pump is properly installed, working, and not connected to the sewer system when the sump pump should be pumping it to the outside? I noticed recently, as a way of an antidote, a house that was sold by a bank to a resident who was also a investor who bought a house, found out that the sump pump had been cemented into the basement so as to make it worthless. It should be that anybody who buys a house should have a functioning sump pump, not subject to fines later on for dumping into the inflow, into infiltration, and certainly not subject to damage where they have to rebuy and re-put in a whole new sump pump system. So it would be two things that it would do. It would protect the buyer, and it would indicate to the city where there's infiltration problems that are man-made. So the question gets down to, do you believe that it would be a good idea for city services at the closing of a property to go in and inspect it and demand, under penalty, that the seller make the sump pumps right for the buyer? That's the end of the question.
There certainly are some communities out there that have adopted such an ordinance. There's a number of others who, we've discussed it with and have focused on some on their system and realized they need to do additional improvement. Recently, many communities have decided not to implement it just because of the current housing market, and so they've kind of held off on that. But it's certainly something to consider because it is certainly improvements that are going to be slow over time, but can make a major difference in reducing this flow. Even if it takes a period of time, by doing little bits at a time. And as you said, it protects the buyer. And then also, there's some residents that you may have had a program to deal with some pumps, and then sometimes they go back because they know the way it was before, and go back and put it back to pumping into the sanitary sewer. Generally, if improvements are made at time of closing, a new buyer is not going to go in because they don't know the way it was before and have an improvement. But Villa Park is one community that has had a similar program like that, and they have seen improvement over time, to that. And there are others that are certainly have done it or are considering that.
Alderman, before we move to that step, we need more analytics and more facts and numbers in front of us before we can.
The other thing that I'm going to ask the mayor on
Before we
this.
move to that step, we need to have more analytics and more facts and numbers, understanding exactly what percentage of the inflow is coming from sump pumps and private sector, and moving through this study and then through one more study of smoke testing, then you would understand the level of input, as far as where your inflow is coming from.
John, you going to do a follow-up on that?
Just to follow up on Alderman Lewiton's question, currently city services Public Works, when a home is sold in the city, Public Works comes out to write down a meter changeover, water meter changeover, and they do note those conditions when there are a sump pump that's going directly into the sanitary system. So at least with the sale of homes, while we gain access to the building for the purpose of inspecting the meter, making sure the meter has a trace device on there to read the meter, we also do an inspection for that and do make note on our service ticket if there's any improper hookups, both with respect to downspouts or with the interior laundry service too.
So we do it already, what we're saying. Okay,
For this, correct, in conjunction with the water meter at the time of changeover.
okay.
What I hear, John, and I appreciate that you're doing this, it's the right first step. All I hear, though, is you're doing analysis to find out where problems are. What remedial and what coercive power do you have to correct it? That's a question.
We've worked with residents in the instances that I know of that we've noticed illegal hookups, and we've worked to correct those, and residents have been compliant with doing those items.
We're talking about only the inspections on new purchases. What power of coercion do you have to get the seller who is leaving Wooddale to give the person who's coming in a clean slate as far as fines, penalties, and unworkable sump pumps?
I guess we'll need to work on finding a way to do that.
That's a good answer.
Again, Mayor, could we actually, is that only home rules that are doing
That
that?
would, no, that'd be, as I understand, an operation, violation of our existing building code. So Public Works can defer them, refer it to the building department. Mr. Johnson can make an inspection, Joe Johnson, that is.
So we already got a code
And,
on the
They
book.
can write a ticket to corrective
Right.
action.
So we have a code in the book, so we don't have to write another code.
Enforcement becomes a politically sensitive issue.
Okay, right. But until we get to that, we need to complete this project first. We aren't there yet to do the policy or revisit. Because need to get this way first to find out. Any other comments? Mayor Johnson.
I do have a question. It's just for my own education. My understanding is there is a diversion line from North Plant to South Plant. Is that shown on your map here?
There is the area, and actually you'll notice there's a little bit of a difference between the exhibits. There is an area here, and we're going to do a little bit more of a study of exactly how the flow is working in here, because there's areas in here where it can go in each direction. So
No, this
some
is
of
a
that-
specific line dedicated for if North Plant has an overflow, or I assume either way, that it can transfer to the other plant. Is that reflected in your
I
system
don't
here?
believe that's shown on there, because if it wasn't in, we didn't add any new sewers or anything with this. We took the city's existing atlas and marked our locations of it, but we didn't do anything beyond
If
that.
it's not
point.
there, is that a pipe you need to monitor and check as well?
I will talk to Brad and discuss with him if I would think that's something that's going to be monitored by the city now, so they know what that flow is. So we'll make sure we get that data from, as well as data from the plant itself, which will be useful for the study.
Okay. Any other questions? All right, there's a motion on the floor, I believe, right? Was there a motion on the floor? Okay. I'll obtain the motion, I'll make the motion to award RJN Group for citywide sanitation sewer flow monitoring not to exceed $71,910. That is my motion.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Oppose? Motion carries. Thank you, guys.